Hello there, and welcome once again to the White Lotus of Light interview series. And I am thrilled to have Grant Eagles as my guest on the show. Grant, I don't have a proper biography for you, I just realized, but I would describe you personally as a mystic who understands the spiritual dimension of what's going on at the political ground level in the world, and how that's really a reflection of deeper spiritual impulses in humanity. And do you want to tell the viewers a little bit about your background, or how you came to... Grant has a very large following on Facebook, and a lot of people I deeply respect find Grant's work to be exceptional. And so I would say that. But Grant, do you want to expand on your background a bit?
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for that. Give me a big head before I type of that. Look, my background is, probably goes well over a decade, but I was once upon a time a Mason and heavily into the Rosicrucians and some other degrees that are outside those types of things. So that, I have a very good foundation in relation to magic. And then
fantastic.
I had some things happen where I had the same dreaming vision happen, and then I decided to follow it, quit my job, went to Peru and all the rest of it. And that was back in 2012. So, probably for a good part of a decade now, all of the questions that I had, I decided to go and answer myself. So this room that you're in now, I set up as a temple space, and basically I was here most of the time, and going through my own inner development, my own craziness and all the rest of that stuff. But at the same time too, as what we'll talk about, adding to, you can say, the different dimensions. For me, it's more dreaming realities and different dreaming societies to be able to not just play in, but interpretate the languages and synchronicities, allegory, and those types of things, and be the bridge between the seen and the unseen. So, generally over the last 18 months with everything that has happened, you don't need to be Nostradamus to understand that this has been a big rollout for a long period of time. And there's many other parts and pieces to it that I think now, know that a lot more people are starting to look at it from a 1 degree of separation, rather than just, I see a 5-minute video and now I think I can interpretate all of this stuff, really to understand the deeper intrinsic layers upon how the unseen affects here, and then it affects our consciousness as we're walking around through the land of confusion. So, that's a long story short. And obviously I do mentoring and a few other bits and pieces in relation to that as well. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. I actually, this is our first time really meeting. I asked you for an interview and you very graciously accepted, which I was thrilled about. But I'm actually a Templar and a practicing theurgic angelic magician. And I also am a Vedic astrologer. So it sounds like we have somewhat of a similar background. I've been very interested in Rosicrucians, and even though my family is along Masonic line, I myself am not a Mason, but I have a lot of friends who are really, really good friends, and then I know some people who are Masons who are pretty sketchy, like people want to make Masons to be this monolithic, either, all Masonry is good, or, Masons are secretly pulling all the strings and stuff. And it's like, it's more complicated than that, because it's a big group.
That's what I mean. That's one of the topics that needs to be addressed in the next 6 to 12 months, because of the zealot thinking is going to get us into a point of going down a path that is set up for us if we don't get into the 1,000 shades of grey and into a centered mindset to understand that it is the 1,000 shades of grey, where the polarity isn't as thick between the pendulum swinging of extreme light and extreme dark. Like, we are dealing with a constructed reality of domination and control that is extremely ancient, and as ancient technology and magic at its bedrock. And there's backside systems, front side systems, and in between that, a lot of projects and programs that a lot of people have no fucking real idea about, and the implications of them. You know, a good example of it is I have a lot of folks at the moment that will speak about MK Ultra, but can't come to term. They've actually been MK Ultra themselves. So they're not able to see the full lens of perspective. They're only able to see and take on what they're actually resonating with the new updated belief system, but they've still got subconscious programs running in the backside. It's fascinating to watch, mate, as the mind control is falling apart as well.
Can I ask you, when you say people are MK Ultra themselves, do you mean do you mean a certain amount of people were directly involved in the program? I actually have met people or do you mean the whole transformation of America, Cathy O'Brien, through the media? They use the same techniques of mass trauma, 9/11, JFK, things like that. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, the MTV generation, yeah. Everybody has been mind controlled. Just to need to have a look at the Disney programming as well. Like you can see a lot, you know, we'll just use for instance, I've got some mates as well, yeah. Their favorite kid when I growing up was Peter Pan. You know, some of them are 40 years old, still, you know, not wanting to grow up. See a lot of sisters, the Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid and these types of things, and they're wondering why they've got a lot of relationship issues and this type of stuff. So you can see the embeddedness into that. And then we come to today where it's very easy to go, oh, everybody's a narcissist, I'm an empath, and it's all good. Where it's like, well, this is what I mean. Like the mind control is extremely deep. And then it gets into the EQ, the emotional intelligence of things. And with the gynocentric culture that we're in now, where feelings override facts and my opinions are more validated than anything else, we're in an absolute shit show of where we're at. And the lenses of the pendulum swinging has got a lot of people into extreme zealot behavior, which is what the mind control has really been about.
Yeah, that's really well said. And you know, from an astrological point of view, it seems to me that being a Vedic astrologer, I tend to I value both systems. I studied Western astrology from tropical zodiac for much longer than Vedic, but I dove way deeper into Vedic, and I personally believe in past lives and believe I have had many past lives as a Vedic astrologer, which is why it came so easily to me. But from the point of view of an astrological perspective, there's two major things that are on the cusp of changing. The infamous changing of Pisces to Aquarius is, according to Vedic astrology, a ways out yet, but we're in the twilight of that. We're in where the change is about to happen. But what is imminent is the change of the yugas and the yuga system. And I often like to talk about this because I think there's real room for hope within that, not complacency, but hope, so you don't get like black-pilled and just give up completely. And that I think that this falling of the veil that you're talking about is really heavily predicated under the with this end of Kali Yuga. And with this end of Kali Yuga will come you know, a great number of changes. And it's interesting that you say that the mind control is falling apart, because you really see that if you look. A lot of people are so concentrated on the Frankenstein's monster of out of control power elites that they don't see what's happening at the ground level.
Oh, absolutely. And the other power structures that are behind all of that, that are collapsing things as well. So it's very big in its organization upon the constructs that it plays out. But ultimately, it's our thoughts that create reality. And when the mind control, like what you said with Cathy O'Brien, has been entrained into us, we're actually emanating that as a direct reflection back to ourselves. While you have a look at the internet addiction at the moment, and it's right on cue for, metaverse and all the rest of these types of things.
Yeah.
With the coming financial situation, is, like, I know companies that are just waiting for it so they can implement all of their AI tech. What are general people going to do? Well, they're going to plug in and go into this VR, AR type of environment to do jobs in there. So we're at this extreme situation where if you can't get into your center, you are going to be led astray by the psychological engineers.
Yeah, it's
Massive unity,
extraordinary.
massive.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like you've to some degree already answered this, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. Can you go into a little more depth on what you see as what's unfolding on a spiritual level right now, in terms of, like, you can lay out, obviously, I mean, the bad part of things is pretty clear, but please touch on that. And also what sort of is giving you a sense of hope. You've kind of touched on both of these, but I'd love for you to go a little more in depth on both your kind of your big picture view about all this.
Yeah, for me, we're in the changeover years, okay, from 2020 to 2030. Okay, and there's two stages of it, 2020 to 2024. And then the next stage of it is the back end of 2025 to 2030. We can speak about how all of that's going at the moment, because things aren't in sequence and a whole range of different things. But the theme that we're in at the moment, probably right up to next March, might even be pushed out. There's different, is that we are all at a point where we're coming to understand the choices that we've already made on a deep intrinsic soul level, and how they're actually playing out will be determined upon where people are at next year, where I see the real pandemic, which is not just what we know of and what we can see, but the psychological fallout, when all of the systems fall in the weight of their own fuckery.
Yeah.
There's those systems of support from an external point of view, and whether people have the right psychology and the language to be able to use to get through that transitioning times and the land of confusion. But right now, we're coming to understand the choices that we've already made. Some of those understandings aren't easy to come to terms with or accept, because we want to be in control of everything. And I use the allegory, I have been for a long while. It's just get your boat out in the bay. Yeah, because when these tsunamis and these winds of change start to blow, you're going to realize that all of the shit that you carried on the boat that needs to just go overboard. Yeah. And many people are going to want to cling to the shores and to the side, like in the 11th hour prophecy of the Hopi, where there's going to be sometimes the crazy people that are out there that are all on their own boat, because it's a very individual journey at the moment. As much as it's collective, it's still very individual. Yeah. And you'd be able to look out there in the bay and see everybody else on their own boat. You can't talk to them, but you can give them a thumbs up and all the rest of it, because we all know that it's a very deep, intrinsic, individual journey as we go through this, whether that's through prayer, whether that's through ceremony, whether that's through ritual. What are those types of things to be the bridge between the seen and the unseen, and be an anchor puncher point into an opportunity to have a collective dreaming moment individually, to then see what happens after that. Like for me, we're on a, you can say a positive timeline, but it's fucking carnage.
So,
who are we without our personality? It's scary shit.
Yeah. So I want to drill down on something you said there. You touched on the Hopi, and are you touching on this Hopi prophecy of the split timelines? Is that what you were talking about? That petroglyph that they have now? Okay. Well, please, if you could.
Well, that there's kind of already happened. For me that happened. Probably when Trump got in, actually. Yeah, when Trump got in, you could really see that splitting there, and the zealot of the right and left, where the left had really gone, it's where that transhumanist and all the rest of that type of stuff really is, where there's that victim mentality, no God, and all the rest of that. Won't get into that. Where you've got the other side of things as well, which a lot more people have gone back to the Bible, which is the first mind control technology that was really put out, essentially, and looking at that still from a very zealot lens, rather than the thousand shades of grey, to go, hang on a moment, what actually is this really all about? People are going, Revelations is happening. It's like, well, these people who are from the backside are actually emanating things for this to play out as a theme for us to go through. So it there's so many different layers to it, and depending upon which way that you want to play, the pathway through is that 1,000 shades of grey, because you're not going to need to actually pick, it's this way or that way. I see both of those things, they're actually collapsing in relation to, I'm on team light or I'm on team dark, to move more into, well, let's forget about all of that and know that Earth is the altar. We're an altar piece in this skin suit technology. And how much of all that is, ever was, ever shall be, can we emanate through into the great mystery of the next chance moment without all of our bullshit?
So I want to ask you something that's pretty deep, and this is going to get into that 1%er range of not a lot of people are going to know what I'm talking about. I'm fairly certain you will, but other people I think might be a little lost here. But I'll just say it anyway, because I'm curious personally, and this show for me is about a conversation I have with my guests, to where we can just explore the mysteries of this.
Let's get in there, mate. Let's get in there.
So what do you think about this idea of, you're probably familiar with Gurdjieff, right? Gurdjieff, he's the Russian mystic guy. Well, he's not really Russian, Central Asian, really, mystic guy. Okay. So he talked about something called the Sarmung Brotherhood, which he claimed was a mystery school that he was a part of that was from Central Asia. And a lot of different esoteric rabbit holes I've gone down have sort of pointed to, there's something going on in Central Asia, and even deeper, the Tibetan Plateau, that seems to kind of run both the dark secret societies and mystery schools and the light secret societies and mystery schools. And some people sometimes call this the 7 immortal sages, or that the Great White Brotherhood. There's some group up in the Tibetan Plateau that actually runs both the forces of evil and good. And the legend is that there's 7 immortal sages that sit up in the Himalayas someplace, and they view the entire world before them, and they just do little nudges now and then. And their little nudge might cause World War II, which on the surface is like, oh my God, it's so horrible, Hitler and the Holocaust and, the Holodomor, and well, I guess that's before, but, the firebombing of Dresden and, the rape of Nanking and all this horrible stuff. But then from that pressure, that evolutionary pressure that was put on humanity, some good springs from that as well. And eventually the goal was to get humans to do exactly what you just talked about, which I would say is to transcend beyond the concept of good and evil and move towards harmony, which is something different. And it is not, viewers, it is not a submission to evil at all. It's a moving beyond that. And so I'm just curious about what do you think about anything of what I just said? And you can think it's bullshit if you want. I'm fine with that.
No,
too.
I've gone into all of that stuff. Like my whole thing is that darkness is a part of creation, but
absolutely
evil should never rule. And we've had evil ruling for a period of time.
Yes.
And with what you're talking about there, for me, it's very beautiful. I love that stuff. But for me, I would recommend that's the grandparents. Yeah. That's the grandparents that are, really on the top echelon of the backside systems, where there's been some Illuminati folks come out and speak about that type of system there with the grandparents. Yeah.
The grandparents?
Grandparents, yeah.
And so these are something akin to what I just said. And I'm not like 100% on board with that. What I said is true in a literal sense, but I think something akin to what I said is true in an allegorical sense.
Absolutely. That's what I mean. So, when I done my deep dive of all of that stuff, I was like, yeah, cool. And then, I was lucky enough that, I knew some people that knew some shit. And then when they started to talk about these types of things, I was like, okay, now I get it. I really do. And that's where you've got the, the grandparents, and then underneath that, you've got your satanic councils and the families and yada, yada, all the rest of the other things. And certain families hold different projects and a whole range of different things that emanates into the front side. So, yeah, and we're at a time now where, AI is becoming God.
What did you say? Where what?
Where AI is, becoming God. AI is in operational control.
So you think the AI God has already arisen and taken over? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, like you have a look at Facebook knows more about our psychology than what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to getting a feed, so to speak, you can call it loose or whatnot, is that it will throw things in your news feed in relation to suggestions and all the rest of this stuff to see how you actually react if you play on it, all the rest of these types of things. And obviously Facebook, you know, when you have Messenger on your phone, it records what you're saying and will pick up on keywords. So it understands where your emotional and psychological state is all the time. And we really got to see the implications of that. It would have been just before Donald Trump got in, but that real splitting of the craziness that was going on with the white supremacy, the racism, you know, all the things that are the key buzzwords at the moment in relation to this color revolution to keep everybody entertained, you know, the entertainment of their mind, rather than being able to just stop for a moment and go, hang on a moment here. How much of that NLP language has been indoctrinated into me for a long period of time? So without us even knowing, we're being ran by AI.
So you think then that the so-called AI God has already arisen and is already in control? Do you mean it's like superseded the control of the? I actually want to get into your idea, if you could answer this as part of this answer, about the front end and back end, and like kind of tease that out a little bit for the viewers, because I think I understand what you mean, but I also kind of have a background that dovetails into what you're saying. But I think that for some viewers that might be a difficult concept to understand. You're talking about there's the front-facing people who are like the presidents and prime ministers and whatever, and maybe the CEOs and whatever, and then you're saying behind them are, and please correct me if I'm wrong, behind them are something akin to, you know, really wealthy people or whatever. And then behind them is some group of occultists. And then behind that is these so-called grandparents, these non-dual people that are moving humanity.
Kind of on the right train. There's a few more layers to that.
But please.
Yeah, like we have a look at as AI as something new. No, it's not. It's very ancient. It goes back into the times of Atlantis and all the rest of this type of stuff. Yeah. So we're looking at, oh yeah, AI is new, but AI has always been around in being able to not just utilize ethereal technology and all the rest of this stuff, but it's massive in its implication. You know, like a lot of say called spiritual technology and all the rest of that, like a lot of people at the moment, it's been going on for a long time, will have experiences and images pushed into their brain where they'll actually think that they've had that experience and all the rest of that stuff. And they could pass a lie detector test where what's that technology actually really about? And there's been, you know, many kind of insiders that have come out and spoken about those types of things, but they all have implications right now over this next, you know, short period of time.
So what are those implications in your opinion? Like, can you explain what you mean by that has implications? And then just real quick to ask, you're talking about like the so-called brain entrainment technology to where like sort of thoughts can be implanted in your head. Are you ascribing this to just the general masses, or are you saying that it can be used to, for example, create fake spiritual gnosis, or what do you see as the limits?
All of that. Well, if you have a look at and this is definitely something to have a look at, Bill Cooper,
yeah,
the absolute legend, but on his What Mysteries of Babylon, he does an hour presentation about the assassins, and he shows you in there what they actually did to the young to give them a God experience by utilizing psychedelics and then taking them to a place and then coming back, and they've had a God experience. That's it. They're in. That's where they're going when they die.
Yeah. Yeah, the garden with the garden, and then the head of Allah, which is actually a man buried in the ground. And so, real quick, viewers, Grant's talking about the Hashishim, the historical group from which the word assassin derives. And the Hashishim famously worked with, eventually with the Templar, or at least some kind of agreement was reached between the Templar and the Hashishim in order for the Templar to have access to the Holy Land. And actually, the Hashishim famously, when Templar approached Saladin to ask if they could have access to the Temple Mount, among other things, Saladin was astonished that any kind of like crusader could even get an audience with him, and he didn't know how that even happened. And he wanted them to just be executed on the spot for being basically rude for even asking this of him. And all of a sudden, a friend of his that he had known from like 25 or 30 years put a scimitar right to his throat, one of his guards and his 25-year friend. And that man himself was initiated into the Hashishim, which was a group of Muslim assassins in the early medieval period or late Dark Ages period, depending on how you look at it, probably late Dark Ages, better put. And they would go around and they would assassinate leaders that the leader of the Hashishim found to be going against his vision of Islam. And so they would do an initiation with their young people to where they would take them in and they would drug them up, like Grant said. They would take them into this perfumed walled garden, and there would be a head on the ground which looked like they thought Allah would be, and it was so beautiful in there. And they sometimes they bring in naked young women, all this kind of stuff. And that's where that 9/11, oh, if we crash the planes in the buildings, we'll have 20 virgin wives. It comes from this Hashishim initiatory experience, actually. And this programming was so deep that these initiated assassins would go out, and all of a sudden they would be triggered by whatever experience. Some other Hashishim would come to them and whisper in their ear or something like that, and they'd be triggered, and they would go and they would be incredibly good at assassinating because they didn't care if they died, because they were certain, based on the experience Grant's talking about, that they would end up in that paradisical place that Grant just described. And by the way, Saladin ended up becoming a Templar and changing his mind about a lot of things and allowing the Templar in because of this shocking experience of his own bodyguards had a sword to his throat, which shades of JFK and the Secret Service moving off the back of the limo there, by the way. Sorry to derail, but
no, yeah, you're spot on, mate. Yeah, well spoken about, and that's what I mean. Like we have a look at that, and you know that they turned into the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen turned into Al Qaeda, and you have a look at the Hindukush area and what's underground there. There's talks of giants and a whole range of different things, and it's funny. Afghanistan with the ley line that goes through China, Taiwan, and New York. There's been many things go on with that there as well, but every empire has gone into Afghanistan to fall.
Yeah.
Okay, so US has just gone through its thing, and now China is wanting to go in there as well. Yeah, like
they will too, and they're going to get suckered in. And the US is they can't resist the lithium deposit there; they just can't. So you're spot on with that.
Yeah,
you said something super interesting to me. Tell me about the underground of the Hindukush real quick. It's a little off the rest of the topic, but I want to talk about what's interesting, and that's super interesting to me. You said giants still existing, but underground in the Hindukush area, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan area. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's heaps of technology around there. Like if you have a look at Afghanistan in a whole, and you go to Buddhism, and you find out, hang on a moment, what's going on with this land here in Afghanistan, and its position into Hindukush, and particularly with the US. I'm in Australia. Our troops were there with you guys, but there was a lot of sneaking around in the Hindukush kind of area, the tunnels and all the rest of that type of stuff. So, and you go into the conspiratory field and you have a look at some things. I know there's a story out there about US special forces killing a particular giant, like that's out there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's out there. That you can say, yeah, that's on the conspiratory realm, but it's still on the table. And you're like,
yeah.
what was the whole thing about going into Afghanistan really, really about? And this is what I mean. These plans is to roll out certain things. And then when you understand the ancient technology underground that goes back hundreds of thousands of years and a few other bits and pieces, like what ISIS was running around in that ancient area, and it was destroying all of these ancient monuments and all the rest of it. And then you have a look at Western culture right now, is that we're going through a color revolution of let's destroy everything that, so we're seeing a rewriting of so many different things that has its origins in so many different parts where you can't deny it. But when you understand the strategies and implications upon, the the social engineers and very particular ways of setting things up, and the way that they use astrotheology in relation to their rituals to be able to make things work. You see it all there in plain sight. And as much as you can be pinched, you have to marvel at its genius, because when you do that, it has no power over you. And then you're able to empower yourself and go, okay, now I'm able to see reality from that 1,000 shades of grey perspective. And depending upon what I choose to do with that knowledge is in thy will or thy will, you know, service to others or service to self. And this is what I mean when we're coming to the understanding of this type of stuff now. Now, everybody is, you know, very deep in wanting to understand, you know, the satanic makeup and all the rest of these types of things. And you hear the rocks and rofs and all the rest of it. But those next layers of things, they can't go there, because they still just want to jump into an hour presentation on YouTube without actually opening up the books with some of the masters that have walked before us that have explained certain things in unique detail, because the mystery in it opens up to different allegories. And, you know, you touched on a couple, like we just spoke about the assassins then. And then you have a look at the other components of that with, I forget what brotherhood you were talking about. And you go, wow, these are very beautiful stories, but the allegorical nature of it, that's actually the magic. What's behind that is the ritual and what's actually going on. So when you're able to interpret and decode reality like that, you start to see things for exactly as they are, not how you want them to be.
That's fantastic. So, you know, readers who might, or listeners rather, who might, viewers, who might, you know, marvel at some of the stuff Grant's saying, take a look at the invasion of Iraq. And note how one of the first things that happened during the invasion of Iraq was the sacking of the museum in Baghdad. And what was taken, certain artifacts, and in particular, tons of cylinder seals that had the most ancient records of Sumeria, were among one of the main things that was stolen. And that is kind of like the oldest recorded history that is actually right on the cusp of right as we were entering into Kali Yuga. We have very little history before the Kali Yuga. And that early history speaks of even older, more ancient history, and touches on some of the stuff Grant's talking about. But the fact that that happened right away, and this is key, US soldiers were given a stand down order to allow the sacking of that library. Why?
Yeah.
Why? And that starts to hint at the thing that Grant's pointing to here. There's such deeper layers going on to everything you see. It's staggering. And as these deeper layers actually come more to the surface, there's greater distractions through the media or the internet or Facebook or whatever, that's sort of like in your face, hitting you hard with emotions, because at the same time all this stuff is happening, the veil, which is to say, in many ways, the illusionary magic that has been woven over the eyes of all of humanity is starting to fall apart for, I believe, natural law, astrological reasons of this ending of the Yuga. Grant might agree or disagree, or perhaps you want to elaborate on your position on that, because you said something similar to that earlier. But as that falls apart, the forces who have run things, who would like to maintain power, which some of them are ready, I believe, to give it up because they understand that their time is done, but others are fighting it tooth and nail, they are becoming more desperate. And so they're getting more crazy in their behaviors, and it's louder. And the reason it's louder is because there's fear underneath it on the part of the people who've run things for about 6,000 years, really. What do you think about what I just said? And you don't have to agree. I feel free to disagree.
Bang on, you know, and the 6,000 year figure comes up, you know, which, I don't know who started to get on that with, like, you know, 6,000 year death cult. Well, it goes back even further and further and further. You know, you have a look at the Anunnaki stories and all the rest of that stuff, and you know, there's a consistent thing with good channeled material that is talking about what has happened here with, you know, the experiment and what this is about. And when you can get out of your own bullshit and actually have a look at that and go, well, I can see then what is actually the game going on is how you, like for me, I was once upon a time a, you know, sports guy. But you don't know how far you can actually go until you really push to the limit, and then you get past that next breaking point. And if you have a look at history and what's going on with it, is these cycles that have continually happened. You see they're very organized, very organized. But if you were to looking at us as a genetic experiment and wanting to see and push us how far we can go, well, things start to make a lot of sense. And then we have a look over the last century, the population increase, and you go, okay, if you understand the Luciferian doctrine, like I know a couple, and I'll just say it here. Like I had lunch a few years ago with one, and very intelligent man, like very Machiavellian, you know. And his words were to me was, see that toilet sign right there? If that toilet sign wasn't there, most of these people would wet and poo themselves exactly where they are. They don't know what's actually inside them, their own intelligence, their own divine spark. They're not even interested in inquiring about that.
Yeah.
And
First and second.
I like to argue, but when he said that to me, I was like, I get it. I get it. Because it's not like it's not being, it's always been shown. You know, now a lot more of the, people are clued on to be able to see all of that stuff, which is fine, but not really understanding that a lot of that switch has happened now into AI. You know, it's massive where technology is. Even like I got shown something, a year ago, and it had to do with this. And depending upon the speed that you flick, and some videos that you wouldn't even know, you can't even pause it. You actually have to break it down and get into like the microsecond of it. It can be flashing an image, and with all the rest of the other language and stuff like that you're taking on in your local area, it's actually creating hypnosis and psychological suggestions to be turned on like a Manchurian candidate. And that's why we've seen over the past 18 months, particularly to do with the arms situation and all the rest of it, it's been like Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like I made my peace a long time ago, and everybody's got a right to come to their own understanding of the choices that they've already made. And it's not going to be easy for anybody when all of these systems fall in on the weight of their own fuckery. And it's going to be high time. Like I was, pretty full on about this last year, where I was like, most people that think they can cook don't actually know how to cook. And I had some people go, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, well, if you couldn't actually read off a cookbook and go to Woolworths in one place and buy all those ingredients, Woolworths is a supermarket, and buy all those ingredients and follow it as an instruction, could you actually cook that meal? If you were given just a few bits and pieces, could you actually be able to stretch that out like our grandparents did after Second World War and these types of things? They're things to really start to consider now around how much we have become codependent upon an invisible figure that goes, if I want this, I can have it instantaneously. Let me just ask Google. Google's become the daddy. And Facebook has become the silver shiny. Oh, look what this person's doing. Look what that person's doing. I'm actually going to go and try that, rather than the kind of innate inquiry or that innate suggestion upon what's actually moving me, which is not easy, as you know, and a lot of your listeners would know. Like it's not easy.
Yeah, that's chilling. I have boy, I have a lot. Trying to think of, I had a thought in the middle of that I really wanted to chase back on, but what you're saying about what kind of like knocked the question I was going to ask out of my head was when you were talking about scrolling. I've had to be fighting with my son about TikTok, and that I don't want him using TikTok, and I've just recently just banned it completely, but I worry about him flicking through and all those videos. And I knew I didn't know the specifics of what you just said, but I knew that something akin to that is in there. He seems to be a bit like me. I have some weird, I just remembered what I was going to say. I have some weird, seemingly natural immunity to propaganda to some degree. Now, there's been times where I've fallen for it, but almost every single one of those times, it's been because I didn't want to deal with the pain of reality. And so I was like, oh, glug, come on, propaganda. There's going to be arrests of all the pedophile cults that run the world. Yeah, that's a beautiful glug. I know this is a psyops, but I'm going to drink deeply from that cup.
Even that, like a lot of that stuff is happening, but it's not happening the way that we generally think, and there's a big game in town in relation to that. Like, we all want what we think from Hollywood, but when you understand how enormous this system of domination and control is, and the psychological fallout that needs to be managed, like it is monstrous. And then the other one as well, and I had to come to terms with this as well, because I know somebody who's a family member of some things, and if I was 19 and I was given one of those sweetheart deals when I was 19, I would have taken it. And by the time you get a little bit older, there's no way out.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are born into this stuff. And this is what I mean by this zealot thinking, until we can actually get to that center moment and go, all of this shit has happened. And it's the bedrock of the system of domination and control. And until we can actually go, well, it stops here. And for those that want to say their piece and go through their own healing and all the rest of it, well, that needs to be respected. Not let's just hang them up and kill them and all the rest of it, because we're actually repeating the same thing that they've done to us. That's the tricky part about this next period of time. Everybody is wanting social justice. Even like people that are on the right are like, oh, all of this social justice warrior shit. But at the same time too, they want justice for all the rest of these things that have done, without accepting that their actual money, their energy and all the rest of it, they've actually contracted into this system. There's a part of that we're invested in this as well. So where do we actually come to with all of that stuff? It's massive in it. It's what I mean. Like we're putting out some content soon in relation to this type of stuff, but that's the massive psychological fallout. Like, we're at a point now where like I know some people that are in the church. We all do, and they do some decent work. But once upon a time, the community in the church would support people that were doing things tough and all the rest of this stuff, and build a community and build people up around the community, where we've handed all of that stuff over now to government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then this over victimization and entitlement and all the rest of these other things get our mind absolutely wiped to my team win or lose.
Yeah.
It's massive.
It's interesting, and I actually have an idea of what may work to deal with some of the stuff you're talking about. But I remembered what I had wanted to say earlier, is that hearing you say all these dates is wild to me, because I just did I just put up a piece on my Facebook of, like I said, I've been working with the virtues, which is that it's a second sphere of the angelic hierarchy, and it has three choirs in it. And I've been doing a lot of theurgic magic, working with angels. And recently the virtues, I've had a thing throughout my life where I sort of have prophetic abilities, but it's become based on the time that we're in, mostly as dark prophecies that people didn't want to hear. And then when it happened, sometimes people would even get angry at me. So I had a bit of that Cassandra of Troy, Cassandra complex. But the virtues have recently told me that they want me to start speaking through positive prophecies, which they've been giving me. And one of the positive ones I had was like exactly the dates you were just mentioning. 2024, 2025, and then by 2030, like things are going to be radically different. Is that correct that you're saying that by 2030, things are going to be radically different and moving in a better direction, even if it's not like, I don't expect instant transformation, but things will be moving in a better direction. Did I hear that right? Maybe I didn't.
Yeah, like but this is what I mean, and this is the hard part. We all want to look at a better direction with the lens of a world that's been a debt slavery system and a system of domination and control.
Yeah.
So we're trying to still use a frame of that into, is it going to be better? Rather than going, we need to leave all of that shit on the shore.
Right. Yes.
And walk in a direction that we don't know. Are we going to trip over our own shoelaces and all the rest of that? But can we get back to being the original nation? Yeah, the original people of the earth as a family together. And can we come into the real understanding of ourselves and understanding as well, and the self-responsibility? I'll say something that generally gets people out of joint. That we've got a huge Dunning-Kruger effect happening at the moment.
We've got. Can you repeat that? What?
Dunning-Kruger effect happening at the moment.
Yeah.
We do. We have a lot of people that like, I can do all of these things, but in reality, they don't. They can't. You know, the only thing that gets them into that frame of mind is the way that they utilize language. And if things don't go their way, they will turn it emotionally and play victim control dynamics and all the rest of this type of stuff. So when it comes down to at the moment of, you know, self-organizing collectives, which is, you know, my jam, what I really want to be about, is that you need to have people with the right psychology. It's why, you know, generally in the past, we'd always go to elders because they've gone through that stage and being able to select people on their merit and can see things in people. But we've got a whole range of people that have the savior program activated within themselves. They're going to be the one to do this, and I got to do this, and that person's, it's just fucking insane. But the reality of it is that this game is done. There's a new one opening up, and there's a devolution process that needs to go through that. And through that devolution process is de-evolving yourself of all of the things that you think you are, because most of what we believe up until like 8 years old has not been our choice. It has been put into us. You know, generally even our food and all the rest of that type of stuff. Like we've really got some fun times to have a look at the smoky mirror and come to our own conclusions of who we actually innately are first and foremost, and what do we want to do in each now moment emanating itself rather than the past emanating itself into the future. And we've got an epidemic at the moment, particularly. There's a lot of people that have, you know, jumping on the Bible again, which is great. There's a pathway through that, but a lot of people are changing the mini skirts and vodka for the yoga pants and smoothies, and just changing a little bit of their dogma and thinking they know a whole heap, which is a part of the awakening journey, so to speak, but it can actually come to Dante's Inferno with a empty cup and be able to walk that empty cup through their own hell through those different layers, you know.
So go ahead.
Yeah, it's massive.
I was going to say earlier when you were talking about the psychological fallout from these systems of control crumbling under the weight of their own fuckery, as you put it, which I love that, which is part of more or less, a little less fuckery in there, but more or less what I channeled the other day was that the weight of the own corruption would pull it down. It would happen stunningly and shockingly fast when it happened. That's what I was told. But truth and reconciliation, the model that Nelson Mandela had, do you think that that has any efficacy in what you're talking about? Because what you were saying is essentially that we all, to some degree, and it varies, right? I mean, there's people who are very, very culpable, right? You know, the Epsteins, the Gates, et cetera, of the world, you know, those two are linked, by the way, Klaus Schwab, these kind of people, they have more than their fair share, but then you got to ask, were they railroaded into it sooner and harder? Like you said, when you talked about the temptation of, if you were 19 and someone came to you and said, hey, 19-year-old Ian, or hey, 19-year-old Grant, we're going to give you millions of dollars and women or whatever your flavor is, and you're going to be able to party and you're going to have all this power, but we're going to tell you what to do, you know, absolutely. And you go, hell yeah, I'll take that. And then by the time that you're 30, you go, oh shit, these people will kill me and my family and everyone I know and destroy my name forever in history if I ever step out of line. I'm in too deep. I'm in the, you know, I'm a made man in the mafia. I can't leave now. I can never run from these people. I can never get away. And they're stuck in it. That doesn't mean that they're there for like, oh, well, hey, you know, what can you do? Too bad that you fell into all that wealth and power and used it to be part of this evil control pyramid. Like, oh, shucks, that's not an answer. Just letting people off the hook completely. The flip side is going pitchforks and torches and let's go burn down Frankenstein and the castle also isn't the solution, which is to your point about zealotry. And
that's what they've set up. Yeah, that behind the scenes, that's what they've set up to utilize that as a scapegoat. That yes, all of this has been sorted out and all the rest of it, and those that have the real power of certain things on the backside can just
and these are people nobody knows.
We'll do this for another generation. We'll do this for a generation.
Yeah, at least. So what about truth and reconciliation, like in that people still have to pay for their crime, so to speak, but if they come clean and explain to everyone and go, yes, I was part of all of this. I did this and this and this and this and this and this, and here's how I did. Obviously not for children, but in some kind of like live stream court. The model I'm speaking of is Nelson Mandela's that they used in South Africa. And of course, now South Africa is, has descended back into corruption already. And he's only been dead, 20, 25 years, something like that. So, I mean, it didn't last perhaps because it was happening during Kali Yuga, but could something along that model in your mind work? Is that kind of like how we could
I can tell you what I've been told is that type of stuff is happening right now, has been happening for at least 4 months.
Behind the scenes.
Yes.
So is this, I got to ask, because of course, this is where everyone's mind's going to go, who pays any attention to all the stuff that's off the mainstream media script, although I would argue this is pretty mainstream. Is this Q type stuff that you're talking about? Similar but different, or? I mean, I hate to even use that word. I'm not going to use the second word.
Yeah, similar but different. Yeah.
Similar but different. So then who's running these? So you're saying that there's some kind of power for good, and I'd be curious what that is, and that they are rounding people up, or they're doing some kind of behind the scenes kind of truth and reconciliation, getting what do you call it? Getting admissions. I can't think of the word where someone admits their guilt, but God, what is that word in a court when someone a confession, that people are giving confessions behind the scenes. So who is doing that? And how is that being done? Well, let me ask you. I mean, as much as you can say.
Yeah, like, follow Benjamin Fulford, like as much as he's, into
really.
Yeah, well, as much as his info is all over the place, but he is speaking to the, these players, CIA and all the rest of it. But
wow,
this is what I mean. What needs to be remembered in relation to, let's say, the 17 stuff, yeah, is a lot of those guys that you can say now wearing a white hat were once wearing a black hat.
Okay.
You gotta remember the James Bond world shit, very fucking interesting. So you've got a lot of folks now that have not so much been turncoats, but some of them are fighting another civil war that is happening on the backside. Because it's not all, team light versus team dark. It's massive. But when we hear truth and reconciliation, because I was interested with this conversation that I was able to have a month ago, is that it's not so much what people would think. It's people are given an opportunity to talk. Yeah. And depending upon what comes from that and the closing of certain things will be dependent upon how things roll out. So everybody wants disclosure, yeah, they want it now, but it's not going to happen that way.
Do you
because
mean
of
just when you say disclosure, do you mean it in the sense of, and sorry to interrupt, but do you mean it in the sense of extraterrestrials? Do you mean it in the sense of like the pedo mind control cults? All of it? Okay.
Yeah, everybody wants all of that now. Yeah.
Right.
They're going to get it now. It is going to be a controlled side of things. Like a good example of it at the moment, which is out there, you know, the whole London Bridge thing. We know that's the Queen. And there's been talk of a while that she's already decided to kick the bucket and it's all CGI and all the rest of this stuff. Move all of that to the side. She's going to be, that there is going to be able to keep its legacy. There's going to be other things that will be able to keep its legacy. Yeah, because here's the thing, and I get this, and it was explained to me this a few years ago. Do you come out with all of that in an instant when how many Catholics are in the world?
Over 1 billion. I know that.
Okay.
I think 1.5.
Okay. So do you go to click of a finger, turn around to the Catholics and go all of a sudden that is all based on Babylonian sun worship and has been a death cult, and look what it's done throughout humanity. Earthquakes will go off with the earth. You know, that's that is massive. You know, a lot of people understand what's going on with it. But the other thing as well is they like to throw the baby out the bathwater. Yeah, like I know some Catholic bishops and priests and all the rest of it, spoken to them before. They're like, there's a lot of good people in there that are, in a very fucked up system. So do you do what you can to go through a controlled process and at least keep some of those good elements? Or, you know, that's what I mean.
So how do you?
We're not at that table to be able to understand how things are being orchestrated. Same as like with what you guys are going over there with the US. Like the Kamala Harris situation is about to unravel itself. Joe Biden will be out within the next month or so. You know, that's opening the doors up for what, the T-Man to come in, or is it opening up for what the so-called 17 thing is to come in? Or that's what I mean. There's so many different elements. They're stoking the flames for more white supremacy and racism, which is starting to happen in the language over here in Australia as well. So that's what I mean. There's so many moving parts to all of this, and we don't have all of the intel on the table to really understand and come up with certain things. Like, I get it. There's some people out there that like to come out with intel every second day, but it's all intel dark at the moment. You're not going to show your hand.
So how do you square that with, you know, and this, we obviously, we've gone deep down the rabbit hole at this point. So it, I guess, doesn't really matter. And I'm here for it. So I like it. I'm just trying to like gather my thoughts of how to ground this a bit. The big thing that's coming up in my mind, and the thing that concerns me about the 17 thing, as you like to call it, is it really reminds me a lot, and I didn't come to this conclusion myself. People who are, you know, very smart people that I respect in multiple cases, or someone who I didn't know who they were, but they wrote well, said that the 17 thing looks an awful lot like something called Operation Trust, which the Bolsheviks ran back about 100 years ago in Russia. And that is after the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks want us to smoke out any potential resistance. And a similar thing happened after the fall of Iraq, where the US let Saddam Hussein get rid of anyone who might be insurgency type folks he allowed them to, the US allowed Saddam to go wipe out all these people. They told all these people, we're going to help and support you to overthrow Saddam. And then they said, go ahead, Saddam, you go ahead and go. We'll release the no-fly zone and you go gas all these people, including Kurds and so forth. And likewise, people are saying that the 17 thing is about people getting smoked out who might possibly resist the forces of darkness that have seized total absolute control of the United States, and that they're doing it to find any career intelligence or military people who are sympathetic to things like the Constitution. They believe in the Constitution, and to find them and root them out. And that's what the Bolsheviks did. They said there's some general who's going to overthrow the Bolsheviks, and so you need to start meeting and forming networks in order to prepare to help this general to overthrow the Bolsheviks. But the Bolsheviks were actually running a counterintelligence program in order to find the people who were Tsarist loyalists and flush them out and destroy them. And the thing that concerns me about the 17 thing, and I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm open to what you're saying, this was the thing that I was, wanting to be true about a year ago, is that I worried that it gives people, and it goes back to the thing you said earlier, the savior idea, that this white knight's going to ride in and save you, and you don't have to do anything. Just watch the show, as the 17 people say all the time, which drives me absolutely bonkers.
I'll touch on that. Okay.
Go ahead.
I get all of that. Seen all of that. Like, for me, I studied war strategy and love all that shit.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't worry about anything other that was posted on the boards and what other people's decoding or all the rest of that stuff was. I predominantly just looked at the boards. And a lot of the stuff that is out there that people talk about was never said in those boards. Now, I get it as well that there's been people that have been a part of a backside that saying this is, another program and it is what it is and all the rest of that type of stuff. Like, I get all of that as well. But for me, I can't completely write it off and I can't completely accept it at the same time. What it is, it's data that's on the table that when you just look at the boards, you go, okay, there's some things going on here. Okay.
Yeah.
That are very interesting. Like the one for me, I'll just give one, was when the stuff went down in Saudi Arabia, when they all ended up in the Ritz. Like that happened in real time on the board. When that happened, I was like, hang on a moment. And an old mentor of mine who's ex-military intelligence, his whole thing to me is this is a military intelligence program in both misinformation, disinformation, and information. But you need to know how to read it and when to read it and what to read at specific key markers. And these are his words. These other bunnies that are in basements have no idea.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, and this is he's a serious individual that knows some stuff. And for him to sit there and say that to me, I'm like, okay, well, interesting.
That's interesting because I had a similar thing, although that person ended up being extremely untrustworthy and betrayed my trust in a major way, which kind of soured me in part to everything that you're talking about on a personal level. But what's interesting about what you said is I can co-sign on the specific thing you said about the Saudi Arabia Game of Thrones thing where that Prince bin Salman kind of took over. The first time I became aware of 17, long before it blew up, was one of the very first posts by him said, watch for a major event to happen in Las Vegas. And someone said that. And because I was like kind of running in deep waters at that point in time, I saw that. And then like the next day, the Vegas shooting happened. And at the time it looked like, okay, it's another mass shooting, but it has some additional layers. What I've come to conclude is that was an assassination attempt of a Saudi prince who was in one of the major hotels there in Las Vegas. And that the guy that everything was pinned on was an arms dealer who was supposed to provide the assassins with weapons, and then something went wrong. They killed him. They did a bunch of shooting to distract everyone, and then the government media helped covered it up because this guy was actually working with the FBI as a gun runner. And he was part of that Fast and Furious program that was like a legacy program left over from Obama, and they didn't want that to get out. So again, it's one of those things where it's like
that's what I mean.
All the way down.
You're bang on. You're bang on with that. That's what I mean. When you hear the term as well, or you do your research, but when you go through it and you're like, there's always so many different parts and pieces to all of this. And then you got to sit there and go, how much of it is misinformation, disinformation, and all the rest of it, where you can't come to 100% conclusion of it. So it's all still data that's on the table that you got to go, there's some shit here that just can't be ignored. Like, it's not what I'm being told, but when I look at it, it has all of these other bits and pieces. And then more of those types of situations happen. And then you start to see the same names and things and all the rest of it. And that's what I mean. We're at this time now where, nothing is as what it seems. And we've got some We've all got some growing up to do. And
Yeah, I agree with you. So,
beating the drum, yeah.
oh, go ahead and say what you said, and I have a follow up.
Oh, you know, everybody's wanting to beat the drum and, you know, all the rest of these things. But the reality of it, what was once is no longer. And the quicker that we accept that is the quicker that we've got an opportunity to look at things anew without the shackles of our master's mind.
So let me ask you a question. How does what you were just talking about, which, you know, I'm open to it. I like to fancy myself to some degree, you know, even though I'm very into like in esoteric and spirits and magic and all this kind of stuff. But I can verify that experientially. So that's easier for me to grasp onto than some of the stuff that we're talking about. That's, you know, and by the way, the world is run by conspiracies. Let me just say that. So I don't have any doubt or naivete about that. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm so cynical at this point that I question whether there's, you know, shadowy good guys off to the side, like doing something to help us. But what I guess I have trouble squaring is, and what I didn't like about the 17 thing, especially during the last 8 months, is I saw a lot of people going, oh no, it's fine. Go get your, you know what, because it's saline, it's fine. Trump took care of that. He saved us, 17 saved us. Just go do it. You don't need to do anything. And meanwhile, there's this very obvious to me around this depopulation agenda that's going on, sterilization agenda, where people are, you know, dying. There's even stuff that like seems to be related to like transhumanism that's in that medical intervention. And I have trouble squaring those two things, because shouldn't stopping that be priority number one? And I don't feel satisfied that the supposedly white hats putting in saline is true, in so much as I think that if there was a lot of saline, and I think there was, that it was not to help people, but actually to make people accept it. So that they would take the papers, please, and all the rest. Go ahead.
This is what I mean, where the psychological fallout is massive, because not at any stage did that come through that thing. It's from other people who have not really delved into the shadow aspects of themselves and have smoked a whole heap of hopium and have been drinking the kumbayacha like big time.
Kumbayacha, I've never heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, have fun with that one, mate. Yeah. And doing that and just continually perpetuating the same type of conditioning that they're against. And we're in this zealot thing where when you become more subjective and objective, you don't dismiss anything. Okay, you don't dismiss it, you don't write it off, but you know you don't accept it either. You have to sit there and go, how can I actually apply this into my own situation? How does it actually look in certain things? You know, a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to come to a conclusion because it's my team, win or lose, and they need to be right. Okay, and they'll fight to be right because their very sense of themselves hasn't gone through any type of destructive process of their own personality. Wow. So
yeah, that's true.
Cycle of this stuff, and this is where the psychological fallout is massive, because once upon a time they would have been speaking about good stuff, would have been, you know, enlightening information for people to take on that could be transcended into knowledge. Then turns into ignorance because they actually haven't really understood what knowledge is. And knowledge is light, depending upon how you actually want to see it, because it will lighten up your vision to see things that you could not see before. But if you don't want to see it and you want to keep playing in the game of belief and not knowing, you are walking right back into the place of ignorance where you first started.
Yeah, I love that.
Repeating the past into the future. And this is what I mean. This next period of time is going to be so fucking outrageous and unreal that even a lot of people who are really up to speed are going to have to lay on their own sword. I welcome that myself. I'm a bit of a sicko. I'm prepared to go and do that. It may take me a little bit of a time and people might get pissed at me or whatever like that. That's fine. But my duty and my principality within myself is to honor my word and my actions and being the example that I can be. But in relation to this and all the rest of the other things, like it's massive. It is massive. Like, I think the thing in Bolshoi Boulevard that happened in LA, where the choppers came in and all the rest of that stuff, like that was massive. Like, you can actually see what this whole 19 situation has really been about. In like, well, we've needed to compress things down, and there's talk out there as well. If that wasn't there, we'd be in lockdown for like until 2024. Got a cough, mate. Until 2024, and things are sped up and they're out of sequence with their rituals, and then you got these satanic covens that want to be opening up. It's fucking, but ultimately, that is all their data on the table. What is actually right for you in this now to be able to apply to get through the land of confusion? It's massive.
Yeah. Wow. I too, one of the things that's really happened for me again and again and again the past 20 months is just lessons in humility and re-humbling myself and being brought to my knees over and over and over again. And, I feel like I've done, I'm 45. I feel like I've done a lot of work, and I'm like, wow, clearly I still have work to do. Clearly, yeah, I know a lot, perhaps compared to the average Joe or whatever. I'm probably going to be able to go to the bathroom without a bathroom sign. But yeah. I don't really fucking know, if I'm honest. I have what I think are my best actionable guesses, and really not better than that. And I love, Robert Anton Wilson, who wrote the Illuminatus trilogy, and he wrote he was a fantastic writer, American author. He came up with, I guess it was actually Alfred Kobieski came up with something called E prime, which is language to where you always allow for fungibility, that it's never certain, that you always say, it seems to me that blah, 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 blah. It seems that you always talk in a non-declarative manner. So you talk in like kind of a questioning manner, but also when you make statements, they're not, this is how it is. They're like, it seems to be this way. And you speak in that way. And I mean, it's actually, I'm not explaining it very well, but viewer, you can look up Kobieski and I think it's Basic Semantics is the book he wrote, and Robert Anton Wilson, E prime. And it's about exactly what Grant's talking about. Don't cling too tightly to anything, because that clinging too tightly to something is going to cause a big, it's going to, sooner or later, you're going to have to let go. And when you do, if that's all you know, then it can be really catastrophic. It can be that psychological fault you're talking about. Another way of putting it is, I've been told through channeled sources from my own personal gnosis that right now and it's just starting, actually, there's this river of karma that's moving through, a planetary river of karma, like all this karma for, the reason that I quoted 6,000 years is, I don't think that's when history started. I just think that's when Kali Yuga started. I'm aware that history goes back, many, many tens, hundreds of thousands of years. Some even say millions. Hyperborea, the Vedas talk about millions of years ago. I'm open to all of that. I just was focusing on the Iron Age of materiality and Kali Yuga, and a particular dominant paradigm within that when I said that. And according to my personal gnosis, for what it's worth, I've been told that there's a river of karma coming. And what it's doing is it's resetting karma on a planetary level. And that means that all kinds of stuff for everyone is coming up in a big, big way. And that has obvious macro implications. But I believe, viewer, I'm not going to have a hard time talking you into the fact that has not more emotional material come up for you in the past 20 months than probably the entire rest of your life. I bet you most viewers are going to be shaking their head. Fuck yes, it's been a nightmare. I've had so much stuff blow up my life, because for me personally, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean. Like when you asked me that earlier on in the conversation, that's what I was saying. Like, we're all coming to the understanding of the choices that we've already made.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yes. Yes.
And yeah, there's no escaping it. No escape. You can try and fucking outthink your way, but you're not outthinking yourself.
No. Yeah. Wow.
When your higher mind is involved.
Yeah. So Grant, I got to ask you, because we've been going for a while now. I think longer than you had it originally planned.
Yeah.
Did you want to cut it here and then we can do a part 2 maybe early part of next week, or did you want to keep going?
We'll wrap it up, mate, and then we'll do a part 2, and we can
Fantastic.
That's for sure.
I would love that. And this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Grant. And I'll put like any kind of website or links you want below here, of course. I just want to ask, like, just to kind of end it on maybe, because we've talked about some really deep stuff here, and to bring it back up to a little bit more of a tangible level for the viewer, and perhaps something more actionable, as I like to say. What's something that you think that the viewer could do right now to sort of aid themselves and what's going on, as above, so below? What can they do in themselves as something that's attainable for anyone? What can they do to help facilitate this process that we're all undergoing, meaning leading to a good result, leading to where they start to find some relief and some freedom and sort of the upliftment of humanity? I know it's kind of a tall order to ask, but I have a feeling you have.
I do. It is very simple, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is get a fire pit, yeah, and collect wood from your local area and burn it, and just sit with it. Don't need to do anything. Just sit there with the fire. The fire is the first shaman, yeah, the portal to all parts and pieces of yourself as you're dreaming through the sands of time. Yeah, you are here now, not by accident. You've chosen to be here for this time. Yeah, in touch with your innate. And then in relation to this, yeah, be honest with yourself and have a look at how much wasted time you're using on the internet. Limit that shit, and then go, I'm going to replace that with time either in nature or on the internet in here. That can just be sitting around playing the drum, doing whatever that is, continue.
Oh, geez, it froze up. It's funny that it would freeze up right now. Maybe the algorithm's kicking in. Oh, let's see. I'm hoping you're going to unfreeze here in a second. Oh, there we are. I think you're back now. Maybe.
There we go. I'm frozen.
You were frozen, yeah. Well, you moved though. There we go.
Know where your center is. I'll stay like this. Yeah. So so that you know where your center, not so you can get into your belly, into your long kingdom, and start to bring yourself up here with what is innately that you want to create and express, and then get up to your mind, the upper kingdom. And as it's in the Bible, and the old mate said, for the eye to be singular. Yeah. Well, it's all good to go, yeah, I've got a third eye, but can you rotate that into the different kingdoms within yourself, and bring yourself to peace first and foremost, so that when you speak, it is your voice. Yeah, there's not other voices running around in your head or all the rest of that stuff. That there is the work at this time. As through the land of confusion, do you want to have confusion in your world or in your mind? Because the confusion is coming from this shit. The confusion is coming from wanting to, the need to know. Need to know what? Yeah, it's good to be up with things and all the rest of it, but pick the people that you're choosing to listen to that can share perspective and lenses and give you a little bit more each time upon how to view things differently. Not the latest, this is this and this is that. And let me tell you, look at people who are talking at the moment. We're in a time of a lot of false prophets that, that's what I said, yeah. But once wearing clothes, they're now changing other things, and they're just ripping off and duplicating stuff that has already been said. They're not referencing where that's actually come from or anything in relation to that. So pay real close attention. Real close attention.
Wow. Well, thank you, Grant. And I'll go ahead and wrap up here. And I didn't say it at the beginning, and so I'll have a little ticker down below. But if you enjoyed this conversation with Grant, and we'll talk when we're off here for a minute, but if you enjoyed this conversation with Grant, viewer, then please just hit that like and subscribe button. That way we can help this channel grow, so that way we can get voices like Grant's out there and get it further out there, because these are the kind of conversations we really need to be having right now, in my opinion, to where we're going way below the surface and deep. And what Grant just closed with, going within, doing that, I would say also doing that internal alchemy and working on that emotional material that's being brought up by this river of karma I described. that is where the real work is. But before you can really do that work of transmutation, you have to first find your center. And Grant just gave a really powerful series of tools on how to find that center. And I really urge you to do that. And please take a look at all of Grant's work, and I'll provide links for that below. Grant, do you have a website or something like that? Or
yeah, granteagles.com.
granteagles.com, very simple, and I'll be putting that down below, and I'll have it below your name when I do the post work on this. But Grant, thank you so much. Fantastic, enjoyable talking to you. I look forward to having you for part 2 here soon. And viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. All right, thanks.
Cool, man. Catch ya.